Welcome back to episode 15 of the $100 to $10,000 series, where I invest $100 every month until it grows to $10,000. This week we are up 2.42%, and overall we're up 19.09%. This week I wanted to talk a little bit about SPACs because SPACs have been the talk of investors these days, with companies like Nikola, which saw its share price jump almost 8 times since going public, and which I discussed in one of my videos last month, which I will leave a link in the description for, and DraftKings, which saw its share price reach 4 times its opening price at one point. And the famous investor Bill Ackman released his own SPAC, which was able to raise a record-breaking $4 billion. But before we talk about Bill Ackman and his new SPAC, let's talk about what a SPAC is. SPAC is an acronym and it stands for Special Purpose Acquisition Company, or other people refer to it as a blank check company or a shell company. The reason for these names is because SPACs solely exist to bring a private company to become a public company by acquiring the so-called private company. And since SPACs solely exist to raise money and to acquire a different company, the SPAC itself does not have any operations or a source of income. Traditionally, private companies become public companies through the IPO process. But the IPO process is very complicated and it costs a lot of money to go through the IPO process, and for smaller companies with limited funds and resources, the funding issue can be a big problem for them. And so that is where our friend SPACs comes in. Since SPACs don't have any cash flows because the company has no businesses or operating history, it's cheaper and faster for a SPAC to go through the IPO process, unlike a regular company. So, investors invest in a shell company headed by someone with experience in the field, like Bill Ackman, whom the investors trust their money with to be used to acquire a promising company. The funds raised during the IPO process of the SPAC is stored in a trust account, and the investors themselves don't exactly know which company their money is going towards. Once the SPAC IPOs and gathers all the investors' money, the company typically has about 24 months to make an acquisition. If it fails to do so, the money that was raised in the IPO process has to be returned to all shareholders. So you may be thinking at this point that you're investing with no risk, right? Well, no, because the money that you invested 2 years ago that you get back is going to be the same amount. So you lose out on the opportunity cost to have put that money in a different company, and there is the added risk of not knowing where your money is going to end up. Usually when you invest, say in the S&P 500, you know the 500 companies that you're investing in. But in a SPAC, you don't have that information beforehand, so there is an added risk. So, since there is an added risk for the investor, there is an added benefit when you buy a SPAC, and these are called warrants. So when you buy a share of a SPAC, you get 1 share in addition to a portion of a warrant. In Bill Ackman's SPAC, you get 1/9 of a warrant for each share you buy. So what is a warrant? The warrant allows the investor to buy more shares at a later date. Okay, sounds good, but there is another thing to note about the acquisition process. The company that the SPAC is acquiring needs to be at least 80% of the money that the SPAC raised during the IPO process. And if the company that the SPAC wants to buy is valued higher than what the SPAC has, then the SPAC can raise funds through what is known as a PIPE transaction. PIPE stands for Private Investment in Public Equity, and this is a way for companies to raise money quickly. And as mentioned before, SPACs only have a limited time to make an acquisition, so it's important for them to be able to acquire the business as soon as possible. And in return for lending their money, PIPE investors get a discount on the shares and additional warrants that they can use later. To summarize, SPACs can be thought of as a piggy bank held by a knowledgeable investor that the investor uses to buy a private company. So that's my basic summary of what a SPAC is. Let me know if there's any further questions down in the comments. And now, let's talk a little bit about Bill Ackman's SPAC. His SPAC IPO'd under ticker symbol PSTH, which stands for Pershing Square Tontine Holdings. And in its IPO, the SPAC raised $4 billion by selling 200 million shares at $20 each. There are two things that stand out to me in this SPAC. First is that Bill Ackman's Pershing Square Holdings is going to add in another $1 billion to $3 billion once the deal is finalized, which gives them up to $7 billion to use to make the deal. And second, Bill Ackman claimed that he will not be taking any compensation. Usually, the company behind the acquisition, when it happens, usually takes a cut of the profits, but Ackman is saying that he will not do that. So this gives a lot of investors confidence that Bill Ackman is going to see a deal through and that he plans to invest in a solid company that he expects will be popular once its shares become publicly available. And there is a lot of speculation based on what Ackman said that the company that will be acquired is going to be Airbnb. But those are just rumors and no one really knows for sure until the deal happens. So if you do decide to invest in a SPAC, make sure you put in only a fraction of your investment funds so that even if a deal doesn't go through by the expiration date, you won't lose out too much on the opportunity cost. That will do it for this video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button with the notification bell icon turned on, and I will see you guys in the next one.